Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Box, again with Dr. Ronald G. Taylor, sponsored by Novo Dia. And also want to just really say thank you for all the support and feedback that you've given us around these conversations. We try to keep them as authentic as possible. I'm a retired superintendent with about 30 years of public education experience that includes being a teacher, assistant principal, assistant superintendent, and also superintendent. And for those who are interested in reading some great stories about careers that are interesting and about the fight for instructional and educational integrity and equity, you can also feel free to look for my book. It's The Courage to Lead with Integrity for Equity, an Authentic Educational Equity Journey. That's available everywhere. There's also, of course, linked on my LinkedIn.
Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Box. We're so excited for our guest today. Today we have Eduardo Cesario. He's currently serving as the Deputy Superintendent of Academic Programs and Supports at Waukegan Community Unit School District 60. He plays a crucial role in leading a team focused on instructional coherence for a highly diverse and low-income student population. His responsibilities include overseeing curriculum selection, professional learning, and the integration of academic support systems. As a key leader, Cesario contributes to the district's transformation efforts in STEM education and equitable teaching practices. Welcome, Eduardo.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor.
So happy to have you. There's so many questions to ask about that rich background that I just shared. For those who know some of my background, I've worked in similar spaces, and it's just so rewarding helping kids who have been traditionally underserved, right? And so when you're in your position in a space like that, um, how does the district currently address curriculum needs and consistency? I know that's a big question, but if you're thinking about solving that problem, consistency was always an issue for me. Not that it was anyone's fault, right? It's just kind of the ways of school district. Everything is not adopted at the same time, and the state gives you mandates and those kind of things that kind of just happen. And there's always, of course, challenges with budget. We all know about that. So tell us how you've dealt with that challenge.
Sure. Again, thanks for having me here today. So excited to talk about teaching and learning and leadership. So to address that question, I think the first place when I started, I've been in district here going on 8 years, and consistency was one of the first things to address. When I was doing my one-on-ones, when I entered the district and started to get to know folks, that was a common trend, that there was a lack of consistency and a lack of coherence. So Waukegan has 22 schools, 15 elementary, 5 middle, and then 1 high school across 3 campuses. And so just the size of it, we're a good mid-size to large district, but that posed its own challenges. So our elementary really was using multiple programs for both ELA and for math. And so I think just getting a deep understanding of who's using what, how long have they been using it, and then what they would like to see. So essentially conducting an audit. But part of that audit also included getting qualitative data, hearing from teachers, hearing from principals about what was working and what was not. And so, in a district like ours and that I'm serving right now, we also, another concern with students transferring from school to school and coming in contact with totally different language related to programs, totally different programs. And so those were all areas that we needed to consider. We collected that data. We looked at what we wanted to do, and then we went about vetting those different programs. And it's been a process. I think at first, again, I've been here about 8 years, but that process was interrupted by COVID and the pandemic, and how we could interact with stakeholders was also impacted. So the process that we used in the past is something different than we used a few years later. We did adopt a new ELA curriculum. We adopted a new math curriculum, or programs for from K to 8. Um, we spent about 5 years with those programs, audited the ELA, especially. We went through a whole different process when the science of reading was going to be adopted here in the state of Illinois. And so that gave us an opportunity to really engage with stakeholders. And I thought that was another piece. Did we collect data? We collected data. This was more about engaging with folks at all levels. So that's what we did. We talked about what we were going to do, why we were going to do it, and how it all connected to the science of reading, and how this was much more equitable for the students and families that we were serving in this community. And I think that process really engaged. We had board members as part of that process, two board members that were heavily involved. So our board was presented with the plan of how we were going to collect data, how we were going to vet programs, how we were going to showcase this to parents, students, administrators, and then formulate a plan of adoption and implementation, and talk about expectations at every level. So everyone knew what we were going to do, why we were going to do it. So um, that's kind of a broad stroke right there of where we started, how it's evolved into what we're doing. And we're going to be transitioning and doing the same. What we're working on right now is auditing our math program. And our approach is going to be very similar, is heavy involvement from our stakeholders. And I think that is critical, making sure that teachers have voice, administrators have voice, and that they're part of the process. And it's not just, here, we're shipping the boxes to your schools. Just unpack the boxes and read the manuals. We're going to give you professional development. No, it's far more heavily involved. That professional development is differentiated. It's at every level. The PD that our assistant principals and principals get is far different than what our teachers get. Our admin need to know how to progress monitor the implementation. They need to know how and when to give feedback. So very deliberate, very intentional, and again, this is just learning from our initial from when I started here, and just making sure that we're addressing the needs of the community, and making sure that this is a process that really is all encompassing and really addresses the needs of our stakeholders, and respects and values their opinions and the input that they can provide.
So you're saying it's super easy, right?
Yeah. Um, you know what? It's not easy, but I think that's part of it, is that it's not easy work. Collaborating with all these groups is not easy work, but it's really important. And our union is, because the other piece to this plan is it's not a static plan. We review quarterly,
Right.
we review the data, quantitative data, and we also meet with the union to talk about, here, where are areas that we can improve. And one of the things that they told us was a critical piece: there are too many assessments embedded in this. So how can we work together to address that? That's invaluable feedback. And so again, having that ability to be flexible, but also at our level, at the district level, progress monitoring and responding to that feedback. Not only looking, is it being implemented, but how well? What are areas of success, and what are areas of growth, and how are we addressing that?
I love that answer. It's almost like a master class in this type of work. And I do some work with aspiring leaders, and we go through scenarios and we talk about solving many kinds of problems with your teams, and how many times when we're having these discussions, I say the magic word is
Yeah,
communication, right? So you had this
yeah,
great plan, who knows about it? Who helped inform it, right? And who's giving you
right.
checks and balances, and what are those unseen trapdoors that are out there? And it sounds like you guys have been so thoughtful in connecting folks, and it's a big project. It's really important, but you also can't rush through it, right? So I just love that, and I know the word that you said over and over again was auditing, was not assuming that what you have and what's already there is the perfect fit. Things happen, kids grow, um, requirements change, state of the art things
Yeah,
are happening all the time. So yeah, I love that, and so I know that in your introduction I talked a little bit about your STEM initiatives. And STEM initiatives can sometimes have a connection to educational equity, which is one of the buzzwords from our podcast here, and it connects to the book that I wrote about my career and my own personal educational journey. How do you see your STEM initiatives connecting to the topic of educational equity?
I think for our district, I think we're really at the infancy stage. We're early on. We have the hardware. We're a one-to-one district. We have the technology. We do have STEM teachers at each of the elementary and the middle schools. Um, Really, our focus is how are we using the technology as a tool. One of the things that, conducting that audit, in order to do this well, it's not just about looking at the data. You have to be in buildings, and that was one of the things that I noticed, especially at the middle school in our district, was that we had students, and this is all well intentioned, from the principal to the teacher. It's all well intentioned. They want students to improve, but what we're seeing is that students were spending a large portion of their day on a screen, not interacting with their teacher, not interacting with other students. And I think oftentimes, if you're not in education, when you hear the 21st century skills, you think it's working with a computer or working with technology, and it's really about problem solving and collaborating, right? Critical thinking, and that's what our focus is right now. Is we're working on developing a technology plan where we can really weave this into the scope and sequence of some of the programs that we're utilizing. What are strategies that we can utilize that will have technology facilitate the development of those 21st century skills? And I think what's most important to us is what we're looking at is student to student discourse. That's really what we're focusing on. I know that there are other schools that are school districts that are down the road with, so to speak, with what they're doing with STEM. And this is where we're at. And I think, again, we have the infrastructure, but we're not as intentional as we could be. And that's what we're working on right now. But I think it's really starting with developing opportunities for students to interact with one another and to intentionally use tools, the technology, to enhance what they're learning about, and to expand their community. I think that's what we're focusing on, where we're at with STEM right now.
Yeah, it's an organic wave happening, right? I think that when we step back, when you and I are 90 or 100 years old, and we look back at education and we're thinking about kind of the history that we're living right now, and how the pandemic kind of forced everyone to the one-to-one methodology, right? Just to continue the educational continuum in a safe space. And some communities came back to in person or a hybrid sooner than others. Um, and then once we did, are we staying on this virtual platform, and what does that mean? And seeing now major districts across the country starting to ban cell phones and really putting limitations on screen time. And so I definitely know where you're going. It's um, the, a complicated decision and topic, where we're all trying to do what's best for kids and trying to learn as we go, and make sure that, as you said, you can't substitute kids working together, building relationships, regardless of their socioeconomic status or whatever it may be. And that's just so invaluable. I agree 100%. And so one of the things you spoke about earlier that I have experience with as well is, doing audits of what teachers are using with their kids in every classroom, right? And for those who are not in educational leadership, it may sound kind of foreign, but listen, some teachers have great intentions, and they may get a free program on Facebook, right? And decided, let's try it in the classroom, and the kids might love it, and the parents might love it, but it's not quite aligned to the curriculum, or not quite aligned to the additional resources that the curriculum and instruction department or teaching and learning department has provided. And so that can be kind of a touchy conversation um, what some folks don't know is that those free programs usually last about 5 to 6 months, and then they're not free anymore, right?
Right,
And so,
right,
and
right.
so the audit deals with all of that. But how do you kind of balance that teacher autonomy with the need for instructional coherence? I was really feeling exactly what you were saying about even on the same grade level in different schools, kids could have a really different experience. So how do you balance
Yeah,
that?
I think that's a really great question. And I think the only way you can balance it is by having awareness of what's happening. We can, you can't set it and forget it. We develop a scope and sequence. We have model lessons, we have model support, we have schedules, we have all of that available for our teachers for them to utilize. But ultimately, um, it's important that the principals are in those classrooms providing that feedback, that they're looking at data, the teacher and the grade level, they're looking at that. But at the district level, my directors are in the buildings every day. I'm in the building. I wish I could be there every day. I'm not, but I'm in there weekly looking at at instruction. And it isn't and I got you. It is, how can we best serve our we're looking at trends, what we're looking at practice. We're looking at how, if things are being implemented with fidelity, and if they're not, why? Because it speaks to the point you just brought up. Oftentimes, well-intentioned teachers bring in a program that is free without the understanding, they're not all of our teachers are experts in curriculum and instruction. So they don't understand that the sequencing of these programs is very intentional. And so if you deviate from that, it really takes away from the rigor, and it also takes away from the sequencing. And so I think it's creating that awareness. This is why we're using this. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. And this is why it connects to. Just like I would want a good teacher to say that to my students, we need to model that at this level. Our principals need to model it. My directors need to model it, but we need to be very transparent. You reference the communication piece, and that's part of the communication. This is why we're using these programs. This is why we are using these here. This is why we're not using these other ones. And if you found ways to incorporate it, you work with your principal and you can incorporate it. And again, if there are teachers that are getting results, that's a conversation. Having been a principal myself for many years, if you're showing that it works for you, and you can, it's like jazz. You can go into a different direction, and then you know how to bring it back, and it's being effective. Hey, that's fine. But for the majority of our teachers, and for a lot of new teachers, I shouldn't say the majority, for a group of teachers, and for our novice teachers, they really need that guidance, and they need that reassurance, that safety net that's there. But that's why I reinforce the principals need to be in there to provide that feedback and that support, so that they're comfortable using the materials, but that they have that ability to trust themselves when they want to move in another direction, or if they want to, engage in another learning opportunity. Um, so I think it's a fine balance, but it is having awareness, and you can't have awareness if you're not in those buildings and if you're not communicating with teachers. And that means, being very clear with what expectations are, but then also listening to what they're saying. And that also helps. Maybe these programs are beneficial. Maybe it is something we need to explore, not discounting them. I think there has to be some flexibility as well.
There's a balance, right? I mean, I think that I've never heard it compared to jazz. That was very, very thoughtful. That you might have a subset of folks who are ultra innovative, your master teachers that you can maybe try some things with outside the box. But if everyone is doing something different, you're never going to know what works well or why, or if you need to adjust your scope and sequence or you know, your approach in your curricula, you'll never know if everyone's doing something different with something different. So I agree 100%. And the last topic, it kind of speaks to, at least when I was a principal and an assistant soup, we were really focusing in on trying to move the needle to really lift kids, their performances to reach their greatest potential. We talk a lot about data-driven decision making, and how it sits there with curriculum leadership. Do you have experience with that in the space that you are now? You have anything that you would share with us around that?
That's something else that really I was focused on, is developing our instructional leadership teams and our grade level teams. And so really spent a lot of time observing those teams. And what I found, and my team members found, was that there wasn't a lot of coherence between what was happening at the ILT and what was happening in grade level teams. And part of that was, just going back to our last topic, you talked about coherence, and you talked about the need to really be able to look at consistently certain factors. And so having that pacing guide ensures that we have an understanding of where our units of study that teachers are having difficulty with, and or that are based on the assessments that our students are having difficulty with, and how can we address that. Our ILTs and our GLTs were not functioning like that. They weren't looking at the data. They were more of a um, just logistics and more coordination. They weren't spending. They were talking high level, like my students are having difficulty with this. They weren't as focused on the data and or looking at trends or disaggregating that data to determine what student groups were having difficulty with what and why. And so it's been a process. We have some high level ILTs that are really using that data and to drive instruction, to make adjustments to instruction. And that's, you can see the coherence between the ILT and the GLTs, the grade level teams. And then we have some that are just really, they're developing, and that's okay. We have different levels at different schools, and we have different levels of support for that. So we've created PLCs. We've modeled for them. We've had, we created a fishbowl, and so modeled what that would look like. Providing professional development regarding those ILTs. But uh, you know, long story short, that data piece is incredibly important to how we're refining our practice and how we're adjusting instruction to meet the needs of our students.
So important, and it's also, from my experience, it really helps to kind of pull the wool back, right? And for us to really get to the nitty gritty of why we're here. How can we call ourselves sometimes successful if we're not seeing student achievement moving, even incremental growth and growth within growth, right? Being able to pinpoint that, and also, from my experience, it also helps when kids know their data, right? When you're in the classroom, we used to do data walls in the classrooms and in the teachers' lounges to kind of keep that, eye on the North Star for us, right? To what's the main thing for us? Of course, our kids, we love them, so emotional learning and all those things, but we can't forget that we're a school, right? Kids have to be learning, and so I truly appreciate that. Thank you so much for giving us a few minutes of your time. I really enjoyed this conversation, and please continue doing your great work. And we are going to keep up with you and keep up with some of the work that you're doing in your space. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. I appreciate it. It was a wonderful conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Take care.